So imagine stepping out of your front door right now. Like you step onto your porch, but the ambient noise of your life is it's completely gone.
Right, just total silence.
Exactly. There's no traffic humming in the distance, no sirens cutting through the air. You don't even hear that subtle, constant vibration of the power grid or airplanes or, the distant chatter of neighbors.
Because the city isn't just sleeping.
No, it is completely irrevocably dead.
Yeah.
And it's not just empty either. Imagine walking down your street, looking into the parked cars or, glancing through the windows of the houses and seeing your neighbors, the mail carrier, the people who make up your daily existence.
Oh, wow.
But they are all frozen in time. They are mummified husks. You are the only living human being in this silent, sprawling gray graveyard. And the question is, how long do you think you could walk through that absolute silence before your mind just snaps?
Yeah, I mean, how long would you keep your humanity before you became as feral as the environment around you?
Yeah.
Because it creates this ultimate psychological pressure cooker. Total crushing isolation amidst the physical decaying remains of everything and everyone you ever knew.
It's heavy.
It really is.
Yeah.
We're talking about an environment that actively assaults the human need for social structure. It strips away every single psychological safety net we've evolved to rely on over, thousands of years.
Well, welcome to another deep dive. Today our mission is to explore a chilling, beautifully realized survival narrative from our source material set in an alternate 1948 London.
And it is a dark setting.
It really is. So here is the setup we're working with. World War II did not end with an Allied victory in 1945. In this specific timeline, Hitler launched a final, desperate barrage of V-2 rockets across the English Channel.
Right.
But these rockets weren't packed with conventional high explosives. They were loaded with a catastrophic biological weapon known simply as the Blood Death.
Which is just a terrifying name.
Oh, absolutely. Now, fast forward 3 years later, and London is a mummified tomb. It's populated only by feral animals, a handful of completely ruthless survivors, and our guide through this whole nightmare scenario.
Eugene Nathaniel Hoke.
Yes, Hoke, an American fighter pilot surviving entirely alone in the ruins.
So our goal today is to deeply unpack the physical, the medical, and the psychological horrors of this landscape through Hoke's firsthand account.
We're really getting into the weeds on this one.
Oh, yeah. We're going to analyze how humanity completely fractures when the massive, invisible societal structures we rely on, like medicine, law, supply chains, basic human trust, when all of that evaporates literally overnight.
Just poof, gone.
Exactly. But to genuinely grasp the psychological baseline of Hoke's daily reality, we really have to start by examining the slate wiper itself, right? We need to dissect the horrifying mechanics of the biological plague that ended the world.
I want to push on that immediately, actually, because the sources are incredibly explicit about how this Blood Death worked. And it's terrifying, specifically because it was not a slow, lingering plague.
No, not at all.
Right, because we are so used to post-apocalyptic stories where a respiratory virus slowly sweeps the globe over months, giving people time to panic, to build quarantine zones, to watch the news.
Yeah, the classic slow burn apocalypse.
Exactly. But this was a rapid, agonizing, practically instantaneous weapon. I'm struggling to understand how a biological agent could operate with that kind of velocity. Look, what is the actual physiological mechanism at play here?
Well, the velocity is precisely what makes it a weapon of total infrastructure collapse. We have to look at the specific physiological mechanism the author describes, which it actually bypasses the respiratory deterioration we usually associate with airborne pathogens.
Okay, so it's not attacking the lungs.
No, well, not directly. The Blood Death triggered instantaneous massive coagulation throughout the entire human vascular system. It caused immediate systemic thromboembolism. Yeah. To put that in anatomical terms, the blood simply hardened inside the major veins of the larger muscles within minutes of exposure.
Wait, so the veins in the heart, the lungs, the brain, they were completely physically blocked almost the second the payload dispersed.
Yeah, but it goes even further than just blockages. When massive thromboembolisms occur simultaneously across the body, it triggers a cascade effect. It's similar to a hyperaccelerated version of a real-world condition called disseminated intravascular coagulation, or DIC.
DIC, right.
Because these massive clots are forming everywhere at once, the body's natural clotting factors. So the proteins and platelets responsible for sealing wounds, they're instantly consumed. They are entirely depleted in a matter of minutes.
Oh, man.
So you have a situation where the major highways of the cardiovascular system are blocked by hardened blood, but the blood that is still flowing behind those blockages suddenly has absolutely zero ability to clot.
So the blood that's still liquid is just trapped.
Yeah.
It's building up immense pressure with nowhere to go.
Exactly, and that leads to what the medical community in the text called venous occlusions. The excess non-clotting blood is pushed violently into minor capillaries and veins.
Which are definitely not meant for that.
Right, these smaller vessels are not designed to handle that kind of pressure. They became so engorged, they bulged and literally popped beneath the surface of the skin.
The visual description in the sources is absolutely haunting. The victim's skin turned a deep, bruised blue, and then the unclotted blood just leaked from every single pore and orifice.
Yeah.
Eyes, ears, nostrils, mouth. And the cramping pain in the major muscles as the blood hardened was so agonizing that many people lost consciousness from the sheer shock of it before their organs totally failed.
They just dropped where they stood.
Yeah, the text describes people dying mid-bite in restaurants, sitting at ticket booths, their hands still gripping the steering wheels of their cars. It's like pouring rapid-setting concrete into a city's water mains.
That's a great analogy.
The pressure builds instantly, there's nowhere for the water to go, and within minutes, the pipes violently burst from the inside out. But, I mean, if this was an engineered weapon, surely the medical establishment had some kind of theoretical countermeasure.
Well, that analogy of the water mains illustrates exactly why it was a medical checkmate. Science was completely paralyzed by a biological paradox. I mean, the doctors and researchers who tried to study the agent were killed by it while they were literally looking through their microscopes.
Just brutal.
The dispersion was that effective. But even if they had managed to isolate the pathogen, the treatments for the symptoms canceled each other out.
How so?
Well, if a doctor administered heavy anticoagulants to stop the blood from hardening in the major veins, it caused instantaneous fatal hemorrhaging. Because, like we said, the patient's natural clotting factors were already used up.
And I imagine if they tried the reverse, like giving them clotting drugs or plasma to stop the bleeding from the eyes and pores.
It worsened the fatal thrombosis. Adding clotting agents simply gave the remaining liquid blood the ability to harden, which just accelerated the total blockage of the heart and brain. There was literally no countermove. It was a perfectly designed biological dead end.
But the sources note that it didn't kill absolutely everybody. There was a tiny, localized group of people who simply didn't react to the pathogen.
Right. For reasons the dying medical community couldn't unravel before the world ended, individuals with AB negative blood were inexplicably immune to the immediate effects of the V2 biological payload.
AB negative. That is incredibly specific, and mathematically that is roughly 3% of the global population.
It's a very small group.
I really want you, the listener, to picture being in that 3%. Imagine sitting in a crowded pub and within a span of 10 minutes, watching the other 97% of the human race suddenly collapse in agony around you.
Just absolute chaos.
Everyone else just starts bleeding from their eyes and dying in spasms on the floor, and you were sitting there and entirely unaffected. The psychological trauma of surviving that, it makes you wonder if being immune is a miracle or the ultimate curse.
Definitely.
Why AB negative specifically, though? Is there a biological rationale presented for why that exact blood type would shrug off this concrete-in-the-veins pathogen?
Yeah, we have to factor in how blood typing works at a cellular level. Blood types are determined by the presence or absence of specific antigens, which are proteins and sugars, on the surface of red blood cells.
Okay, tracking with you.
Type AB has both A and B antigens. The negative part refers to the absence of the Rh factor, which is another specific protein. So, in the context of this biological weapon, we can extrapolate that the pathogen specifically targeted and bound to either the Rh protein or the universal antibodies present in other blood types.
Oh, I see.
Because AB-negative individuals lack the Rh protein and do not produce A or B antibodies, the biological agent simply had nothing to latch onto. It flooded their systems and just flushed right out without triggering the catastrophic coagulation cascade.
So their sheer rarity is what saved them.
Mm-hmm.
But the text makes a critical distinction here. Surviving the initial attack didn't mean you were completely safe. There's this horrifying secondary layer to the weapon.
Yes, the slow death.
Right, the sources introduced this concept of the slow death. Not everyone who wasn't AB negative died instantly in 1945. A very unfortunate few contracted a delayed version of the exact same disease.
And the slow death is a crucial narrative and psychological element here. These victims suffer the exact same physiological fate. So the coagulation, the bursting capillaries, the internal hemorrhaging, but it's stretched out over an excruciating timeline of months or even years.
That sounds like torture.
It is. The pathogen is slowly winning a war of attrition against their immune systems. They're visually marked by dark, bruised smudges under their eyes, broken veins mapping their faces, and blood literally jellied at their fingertips.
Walking corpses.
Exactly. Walking corpses fully aware that their vascular system is slowly turning to concrete.
Which brings us right into the actual timeline of the narrative in 1948. The disease itself, the rapid airborne version, has largely run its course by this point. The air is safe to breathe.
Right.
The real threat to our protagonist, Hoke, and the other immune survivors isn't the virus anymore. It's the other survivors, specifically the ones suffering from the slow death who refuse to accept their inevitable fate.
And that dynamic forms the central conflict of Hoke's daily existence. The breakdown of society has left the immune population as prey.
So let's talk about Hoke. He's an American who flew for the first American Eagle Squadron. For some historical context, these were actual squadrons of American volunteer pilots who illegally crossed into Canada or Europe to fly with the British Royal Air Force before the U.S. officially entered the war after Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, so he's a guy who actively sought out a fight against fascism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now, he's surviving alone in the ruins of London with his dog, a tough mongrel named Cagney. And when I say surviving, I mean he has fortified a very specific location. He's currently squatting in Buckingham Palace.
Of all places, right?
Right. He wakes up in a ruined balcony room, drinking warm English beer from brown bottles, sleeping with his heavy boots on, surrounded by scavenged firearms, and relying entirely on Cagney's predatory instincts to warn him of danger.
The author's choice of setting here is deeply intentional. We have a lone American fighter pilot turning the absolute seat of the British Empire, the pinnacle of its historical continuity, into a gritty, fortified campsite.
It's quite the image.
It visually establishes the complete inversion of the world order. The monarchy is gone, the empire is dead, and the palace is just a pile of masonry offering tactical high ground. But his morning routine is violently interrupted by the primary antagonists of the narrative. Sir Max Hubble and his militia, known as the Blackshirts.
Right. And I want to be very precise about how we discuss this faction, adhering strictly to the sources. The text positions Hubble's militia as a remnant of pre-war fascist movements.
Yes.
They are characterized by their black uniforms, their rigid adherence to hierarchy, and a documented history of bigotry and violence. We are looking at them strictly as the structural antagonists the author designed for this alternate history.
Analytically speaking, the author utilizes this specific political structure as a mechanism to explore the psychology of control.
How so?
Well, Hubble himself is dying of the slow death. His body is actively failing. The blood is visibly coagulating in his extremities. To combat this, he has developed a completely unfounded pseudoscientific obsession.
Right, the transfusion idea.
Exactly. He genuinely believes that if he can capture a healthy, immune AB-negative person like Hoke and perform a complete, massive blood transfusion, it will somehow flush the pathogen from his system and cure him.
So to Hubble and his heavily armed militia, Hoke isn't a human being with rights. He's quite literally a walking blood bank.
Just a natural resource to be extracted.
A resource. And Hubble's men are closing in on the palace. What follows in the text is one of the most intense, visceral escape sequences I've ever encountered. Hoke realizes he is surrounded, so he leaps onto his scavenged motorcycle, a buff-colored, matchless G3L.
An iconic bike.
Yeah. This is a bike originally manufactured in massive numbers for British desert warfare, designed to be rugged and maneuverable. He kicks it to life and literally rides it through the interior hallways of Buckingham Palace.
The juxtaposition in the sequence is just brilliant. You have this roaring, oil-spitting machine tearing up priceless carpets.
Yeah.
Hoke is speeding past Rembrandts, Vermeers, and centuries of accumulated imperial wealth in the picture galleries, all while dodging Sten gunfire from Hubble's men. It's wild.
The art, the history, the staggering cultural significance of the palace, it all means absolutely nothing in the face of raw survival. The palace is just a dirt track with inconveniently placed obstacles to him now.
He literally takes the grand staircase on the motorcycle. He basically launches the bike over the steps. He bursts out into the palace courtyard, and there's a heavy Bedford OYD army truck sliding across the cobblestones, trying to block the narrow archway exit.
It's so cinematic.
It really is. Hoke plays a terrifying game of high-speed chicken. He accelerates straight at the sliding truck, feeling bullets grazing the leather of his flight jacket, and he slips the motorcycle through the closing gap with literally inches to spare, bursting out into the sunlight and tearing down the mall.
Amazing scene.
But, as I read this incredibly cinematic sequence, I found myself stuck on a massive logical contradiction regarding the antagonists. I want to push on this idea of Hubble's militia. The ideology they represent, this totalitarian, militaristic fascism, is exactly the ideology that launched the V-2 rockets.
It is the political movement that literally ended the world. Yet Hubble and his men still cling to the aesthetic. They are wearing the black shirts, using military titles, issuing formal orders. Why on earth hold on to a political uniform when there is absolutely no society left to govern? There's no economy to control, no borders to defend. There is nothing left to rule.
It's a compelling contradiction, but we really have to look at the psychological utility of that uniform. For Hubble and his men, the rigid hierarchy and the political ideology are no longer tools for governing a society.
What are they then?
They serve a much more desperate function. They are psychological shields against the unimaginable void of their reality. Consider what happens if Hubble admits the truth.
Okay.
If he takes off the uniform and acknowledges that the war is over, that his own side's ultimate weapon destroyed the very civilization they were trying to conquer, and that his own body is irreversibly rotting from the inside out, it requires admitting total, absolute defeat on an existential level.
Wow, so the uniform is a delusion. It's mental armor against the apocalypse.
Precisely that. By maintaining the military structure, by issuing daily orders and maintaining ranks, Hubble manufactures an illusion of control. He creates a micro-society where his word still has weight.
That makes a dark kind of sense.
Furthermore, by turning Hoke into a resource to be hunted, a target that Hoke himself grimly notes is treated as, quote, Jew and black rolled into one within the context of their specific hatred Hubble. Hubble provides his dying men with a focal point.
A distraction.
Right. He redirects their absolute terror of the slow death into structured, familiar violence against another. It is the tragic, inevitable culmination of their ideology playing out in a vacuum. They need an enemy to avoid looking in the mirror at their own decay.
I suppose if you strip away the object of your hatred, you're just a dying man alone in a ruined city.
That makes
Terrifying sense. But Hoke's solo flight from this delusionally focused army comes to an abrupt and violent halt.
It does.
He's racing the matchless through Trafalgar Square. The text paints this eerie picture of the square frozen in time, clogged with abandoned double-decker buses and cars just sitting where their drivers died.
Yeah, just navigating a steel graveyard.
Exactly, yeah. He's weaving through this, trying to outrun Hubble's Humber station wagon and the Bedford truck that are hot on his tail. He makes a desperate move to jump the motorcycle up the broad stone steps of the National Gallery, but the angle is wrong. He crashes hard.
Yeah, he totally wrecks the bike.
The bike is wrecked, sliding across the stone. He's out of ammunition. The Blackshirts are swarming out of their vehicles, moving up the steps that take him alive for his blood. And just when Hoke is preparing to draw his combat knife and go down swinging, he is forced into a situation he has spent 3 years avoiding, relying on other human beings.
This is the critical collision of survivors the narrative has been building toward. Just as Hoke is entirely cornered, a black Ford violently crashes into the scene, scattering the Blackshirts. It is driven by a young woman who throws open the door and orders him to get in.
He dives into the back seat of this moving Ford, and as they are speeding away, dodging bullets and weaving dangerously through the wrecked streets of the Strand, he assesses his rescuers.
Right, there are 3 of them.
Yeah, Cissie, the driver, who is a tough, pragmatic, working-class Londoner. Muriel, a passenger who carries the distinct air of an upper-class lord's daughter. And a man in a brown trilby hat sitting next to Hoke.
Okay.
Through shouted introductions over the roar of the engine, Hoke learns they are all AB negatives. They're the immune 3%. And then the man in the hat introduces himself as Wilhelm Stern, and he speaks with a thick, unmistakable German accent.
And Stern reveals that he was a Luftwaffe bomber pilot. He was shot down over England in 1940, spent 5 years in a POW camp, and managed to escape into the countryside right as the plague hit the island.
And Hoke's reaction is instantaneous and completely feral. The very second he processes the German accent and the word Luftwaffe, he lunges across the seat and tries to strangle Stern to death with his bare hands.
While they're still being actively shot at.
Exactly. While they're being shot at by Blackshirts. Cissie is screaming at him from the driver's seat, physically beating on him to let go of Stern's throat, and the distraction causes her to lose control and crash the Ford into a massive, abandoned tram.
It's just chaos.
Absolute chaos. I have to pause here because this reaction is wild. The world has literally ended. Nations do not exist anymore. London is a graveyard. Yet Hoke's first instinct upon hearing a German accent is immediate murder.
Yeah.
I look at Hoke strangling Stern in the back of that car, and I have to wonder, is this a genuine, uncontrollable trauma response from a combat veteran, or is Hoke actually looking for an excuse to maintain his wartime mentality to avoid dealing with the overwhelming reality of the apocalypse?
It is a profound intersection of both. We are looking at a masterclass in the psychological concept of the enemy and conditioned reflex.
Right.
For Hoke, Stern is not simply another human survivor in a ruined world. Stern is the living, breathing embodiment of the regime that destroyed the planet.
He's the face of the enemy.
Exactly. He represents the Luftwaffe pilots who killed Hoke's squadron mates, the military machine that dropped the V-2 rockets, and the abstract force that took away everything Hoke ever loved. Hoke's brain has been heavily conditioned by years of combat to react to that specific stimuli, the accent, the uniform, the identity, with lethal force.
But look at the stark contrast in how Cissie and Muriel react to Stern. To them, the accent doesn't trigger a homicidal rage.
And that contrast is vital. For Cissie and Muriel, Stern is a rarity. He is another living human being sharing their cursed blood type. He is an ally against the immediate threat of the Blackshirts.
Okay, I see.
This highlights how shared trauma can act as a psychological solvent or a hardener. For the women, the sheer magnitude of the blood death and the isolation of surviving it has effectively erased the nationalistic boundaries of the old world. A shared blood type supersedes a shared flag.
Wow, that's a great point.
But for Hoke, the trauma has aggressively calcified those boundaries. His hatred for the enemy is the only structural framework keeping him moving. If he stops fighting the war, he has to process the grief of the apocalypse. His hatred is his fuel.
Well, his fuel almost gets them all slaughtered.
Right.
The Ford is totaled against the tram, and Hubbell's trucks are advancing down the street. Hoke realizes they cannot outrun them on foot, so he points to the only viable, defensible escape route: the dark entrance of the Holborn Underground station.
Oh, the underground.
Yeah. They manage to grab some old gas masks from an abandoned ticket booth, which features the grotesque detail of a mummified clerk just sitting there with his jaw resting on the counter, and they flee into the tunnels.
This descent underground forces a massive tonal shift in the narrative. We move from an open-air military chase into an environment of pure, claustrophobic, sensory horror.
It really gets dark here.
Literally and figuratively. The Blackshirts reach the entrance, but they lack the courage to follow the group into the subterranean darkness. So they opt for a brutal siege tactic. They light homemade gasoline bombs and hurl them down the main stairwell.
And that stairwell is a nightmare scenario. It is piled incredibly high with the dried, mummified corpses of Londoners.
Yeah.
These were people who sought shelter from the rockets in 1945, but the pathogen reached them anyway, and they died right there on the escalators. The gasoline fire catches the dried, desiccated husks of the bodies, and suddenly there is a literal wall of flame rolling down the stairs after our group.
Terrifying.
It forces them deeper into the subterranean labyrinth. They have to rip off their gas masks because the smoke is blinding the eyepieces, and they blindly navigate out onto the main train platform.
The environmental storytelling the author employs here is devastatingly effective because it relies on historical reality.
Oh, during the Blitz.
Exactly. During the actual Blitz of World War II, the London Underground platforms weren't just transit hubs. They became sprawling, frozen communities. Thousands of people practically lived in the tube stations to survive the nightly bombings.
Right.
So as Hoke and the group are navigating the platform, they aren't just walking past trains, they're walking past makeshift homes. The text describes cots, wind-up gramophones, thermoses, a child's doll, and interspersed among these deeply domestic, intimate items are thousands of mummified bodies. It is a museum of final moments.
And it is among these bodies that Muriel makes a horrifying discovery. She trips in the darkness and finds the corpse of a small child. But the corpse isn't whole. Yeah, it has been partially consumed. The eyes are missing. The soft tissues and organs are gone. Something living in the dark has been actively eating the dead. And then, over the roaring draft of the fire rolling down the stairs, they hear it.
The rats.
A massive, high-pitched squealing begins echoing from the absolute blackness of the train tunnel ahead of them.
The gasoline fire at the entrance has acted as a flushing mechanism. It has driven out the subterranean scavengers. A massive horde of feral, starving rats that have been surviving and multiplying by feeding on the human dead for 3 entire years, are flushed out of their nests.
And the horror is compounded, right?
Yeah.
Because the rats aren't just running away. The Blackshirts' bombs have ignited them.
It is one of the most apocalyptic visuals imaginable. A stampede of flaming miniature infernos screaming in agony, rushing down the tunnel tracks straight toward them.
Hoke violently shoves the girls into a shallow safety recess in the brick wall as these burning rats run past them. The text describes the rats splashing into puddles of stagnant water, boiling it on contact, literally cooking themselves alive as their fat burns while they run.
Just horrifying.
And then the ultimate environmental disaster strikes. The burning rats run deep enough down the line to ignite a trapped pocket of sewer or line gas. There's a massive concussive explosion. Exactly. The shockwave hits the group, and thick, suffocating black smoke begins to violently fill the platform space. They are physically trapped. There is a wall of fire on the stairs behind them, and a collapsed, burning, smoke-filled tunnel ahead of them.
It's in this exact moment of total physical extremity that the author reveals the true starkness of Hoke's internal psychological state.
I need to ask you about this because this moment gave me chills. Put yourself in Hoke's physical situation. Pitch darkness. The overwhelming smell of roasted vermin and burning mummies, thousands of corpses surrounding you, and suffocating smoke filling your lungs.
It's sensory overload.
Beyond overload. The physical and sensory input is so far beyond normal human capacity. Scientifically, psychologically, at what point does the human brain just short circuit? When does the nervous system simply shut down and give up? Because Hoke doesn't shut down. In fact, as he is pressed against the wall watching these rats burn, he actually smiles.
Yeah, that smile is deeply unsettling, but it is the key to understanding the mechanics of survival adrenaline and Hoke's highly specific coping mechanisms. We have to remember Hoke's background as a combat fighter pilot. His brain has been extensively trained to compartmentalize extreme, life-threatening horror and hyper-focus on the immediate physical task of survival. When the sensory input exceeds processing capacity, his adrenal system essentially overrides the panic response. Okay, that makes sense. But the smile, that suggests something much darker.
It's definitely not the smile of a man who is relieved.
No, it shows a vengeful, almost sadistic shift in his psyche. He views those rats as vermin that desecrated the human dead, the very people he fought a war to protect.
Oh, wow. Didn't think of it like that.
Yeah, watching them burn alive is a twisted, localized form of justice for him. It is not a healthy psychological reaction. It is a profound symptom of systemic psychological damage. He has completely shut down his capacity for empathy and horror in order to survive, replacing it with a grim, hard, retaliatory hatred.
His hatred is his armor, just like Huddle's uniform. But psychological armor doesn't provide oxygen. Just as the smoke is about to completely overwhelm them, literally as their lungs are failing and they are about to choke to death on the platform, a guiding light suddenly appears through the smog.
Right, a literal light in the dark.
An iron door grinds open in the tunnel wall, and we are introduced to a character who survives using a coping mechanism that is the exact polar opposite of Hoke's rage.
Enter Albert Potter.
Albert Potter is a 60-year-old man wearing the dark blue overalls and tin helmet of an ARP. An air raid precautions warden. The helmet even still has the white W painted on it.
Yeah, the classic warden look.
He holds a paraffin lamp and pulls the choking group through the heavy iron door into a secret, deep-level civil defense bunker. And Potter is a fascinating, profoundly tragic figure. Through dialogue, we learn he has been living entirely alone in this deep subterranean bunker for 3 years.
Alone for 3 years.
Yeah. He actually dragged the mummified corpses of his former colleagues outside into the cram tunnels just to make the bunker livable. But despite living in a graveyard, he still religiously wears his uniform. He genuinely believes he is still officially on duty, maintaining the bunker, waiting for an all-clear command from the surface that is never, ever going to come.
He even mentions he has seen Hoke scavenging on the surface through periscopes.
Potter is the absolute embodiment of extreme denial utilized as a survival tool. Where Hoke relies on violent rage and isolation, and Hubble relies on fascist hierarchy, Potter relies on an obsessively rigid routine.
Exactly.
I look at Potter and I see a psychological tourniquet. Just like the body will cut off blood flow to a heavily wounded limb to save the vital organs, Potter's brain has completely cut off reality to save his basic sanity. If he acknowledges the world is dead, he bleeds out mentally.
That tourniquet analogy is perfectly apt. By rigidly adhering to his wartime duties, checking the air filters, logging the hours, wearing the tin helmet, Potter manufactures a micro-reality over which he has absolute control.
It's his whole world.
Right. The structure of the bunker is the structure of his mind. If he takes off that helmet, he is forced to acknowledge that the society he served is dead, his family on the surface is dead, and his entire reason for existing has evaporated. Delusion, in this specific environment, acts as a highly effective, load-bearing psychological pillar.
But the violent reality of the apocalypse doesn't respect his delusion. The line gas explosion in the train tunnel triggers a catastrophic chain reaction. The vibrations cause the ancient pipes and emergency fuel stores deep in the bunker to start cooking off.
Everything starts falling apart.
The whole underground complex begins groaning and collapsing. Potter's safe haven is destroyed in minutes, and he has to frantically lead the group upward through a series of abandoned strategic planning rooms. There's this incredible, haunting detail the author includes where they run past a yellowing wanted poster for Adolf Hitler pinned to a map board, charging him with murder and arson.
Oh yeah, that detail.
It is such a jarring relic. It's a snapshot of a time when humanity still believed there would be courts and trials and justice.
It highlights the agonizing gap between the expectation of victory and the reality of the blood death. And as they are sprinting through these collapsing strategic rooms, the structural integrity completely fails. The floor gives way beneath them.
A massive fissure opens up, revealing a fiery pit of burning fuel stores below. Hoke slides toward the edge and barely manages to grab onto a loose radiator valve hanging off the crumbling wall. He is dangling directly over the flames, his grip slipping on the hot metal. The smoke is blinding.
It's a really tense moment.
And the person who reaches down over the crumbling edge into the smoke to pull him up is Wilhelm Stern. The German Luftwaffe pilot Hoke tried to violently strangle just an hour earlier. Stern risks his own life, reaching into the blinding smoke to haul Hoke over the edge. But as Hoke is pulled to safety, he notes that Stern's eyes hold a cold, mocking calculation.
This is a pivotal narrative moment because it forcefully injects cognitive dissonance into Hoke's black and white worldview. Hoke desperately wants to view Stern purely as the evil enemy, the caricature of the regime he hates.
Right, he wants it to be simple.
But Stern actively saving his life shatters that simplistic framework. We have to analyze Stern's motivation here. Did Stern risk his life out of a sudden, profound bond between immune survivors? Did the shared trauma of the tunnels awaken a sense of universal humanity? Or is it pure, ice-cold pragmatism?
Let's push on that idea of pragmatism. Knowing Stern's background as an escapee and that cold, mocking look Hoke describes, it feels highly calculated.
Yeah, it really does.
Stern doesn't know London. He doesn't have a safe house. Does Stern simply recognize that he needs Hoke's combat skills and intimate knowledge of the ruined city to navigate this hostile landscape? Is he saving a friend, or is he preserving a tactical asset?
The text heavily leans toward the latter, which is what makes it so psychologically damaging for Hoke. Hoke owes his life to the man he hates most, and he suspects that man only saved him to use him. It traps Hoke in a debt he resents.
That's rough.
But the environment doesn't allow them time to process this complex dynamic. Potter leads them out of the collapsing bunker through a heavy bulkhead and into yet another terrifying subterranean layer of the city. A massive, abandoned tram tunnel running deep under the Strand.
And here, the source material pivots violently from the horror of the dead to the horror of the newly wild. Potter is leading them with his paraffin lamp. They are walking past these giant, silent trams that are packed with the mummified corpses Potter relocated from his bunker.
Right, his makeshift graveyard.
It's a surreal, silent graveyard. But then, the lamplight catches something moving in the shadows ahead. Glowing yellow eyes reflect the flame. A pack of starving, feral, drooling dogs is physically blocking their path. And before the confrontation happens, the text takes a deliberate moment to flash back to how Hoke met his own dog, Cagney, back in 1946.
This juxtaposition between Cagney and the feral pack is vital. It is the author's way of explaining the severe ecological reset of this world.
Exactly. In the flashback, Hoke remembers cooking scavenged canned sausages over a small fire in the ruins. This skinny, beat-up mongrel was watching him from the shadows. Suddenly, the dog is attacked from the sky by a flock of giant, mutated ravens.
Which is terrifying in its own right.
The text explains these carrion birds had adapted to the endless supply of dead human flesh covering the city, and they had grown massive and incredibly aggressive. Hoke uses a scavenged Lee Enfield sniper rifle to shoot the ravens off the dog, and afterward they quietly share the sausages.
A bonding moment.
Yeah, it forged this silent, fiercely independent partnership. Cagney isn't a pet in the traditional sense. He is a companion who retained just a sliver of loyalty. But the dogs blocking the tram tunnel, they're entirely different entities.
They represent the rapid, brutal breakdown of thousands of years of domestication. When you completely remove the human structural element, the feeding schedules, the warm houses, the discipline, the ecosystem experiences a massive vacuum.
And nature abhors a vacuum.
And biology fills that vacuum with terrifying speed.
It is deeply tragic to read. These were domestic pets, man's best friend. The text describes seeing the recognizable shapes of spaniels, terriers, and retrievers in the pack, but now they are apex predators hunting humans in the dark. How does that happen so fast? How do centuries of selective breeding just vanish in 3 years?
Well, we have to understand canine psychology. Domesticated dogs still possess ancient, dormant pack instincts and prey drives inherited from wolves. Selective breeding simply suppresses those drives in favor of docility and obedience.
Okay, that makes sense.
But when absolute starvation sets in and human dominance completely disappears, survival overrides conditioning. The pack structure rapidly reasserts itself around an alpha. They learn to hunt collectively. The giant ravens and the feral dogs are brutal examples of rapid behavioral adaptation. They are no longer part of the human world. They have actively reclaimed the concrete city as a wilderness.
And Hoke knows you cannot reason with the wilderness. He doesn't hesitate. He draws his Colt .45 and shoots the alpha dog right between the eyes. The deafening echo of the gunshot in the tunnel shatters the pack's nerve, and they scatter into the shadows. But as our group carefully walks past the carcass, they look back and see the pack returning out of the dark to cannibalize their own dead leader.
It is absolutely brutal.
It clears the way, though. Finally, after fighting through fascist militias, walls of fire, burning rats, collapsing bunkers, and wild dogs, the group finds a set of stairs and emerges into the blinding sunlight at Waterloo Bridge. They have survived the underground. And Hoke leads them to one of his primary fortified bases, a place that epitomizes the lost world of luxury.
They seek sanctuary at the Savoy Hotel.
They head to Suite 318, 319. And the visual contrast is incredibly jarring. You have the grand foyer of the hotel, crystal chandeliers, thick velvet drapery, sweeping marble staircases. But sitting in all the luxurious easy chairs are the mummified remains of London's elite who died while drinking their afternoon tea.
Talk about a juxtaposition.
Hoke leads the group past this macabre scene of dead high society up to his suite, and he unlocks the heavy door to reveal a hoarder's paradise.
It is a profound visual representation of survival meeting deep nostalgia.
The suite is crammed floor to ceiling with scavenged boxes. Canned Spam, cremola custard, Ostermilk, tins of bachelor's peas. There are massive amounts of high-end alcohol, Jack Daniels, famous grouse, vintage French wine.
It's good stuff.
There are heavy weapons and ammunition stacked on the antique furniture. There is a wind-up gramophone in the corner playing a Bing Crosby record. And because the Savoy operates on deep artesian wells, there is still actual water in the gravity tanks, meaning they can take cold showers.
Oh, wow.
The suite is essentially a pharaoh's tomb. It's stuffed with the riches of a dead empire. In practical survival terms, it's completely useless. I mean, you can't eat a crystal chandelier or a velvet curtain, but the food, the booze, the music, it is vital for his mental comfort. It raises such a fascinating question. If the world ended tomorrow, what completely useless luxury would you hoard just to feel human?
Right. It connects to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but operating in reverse. Once Hoke secures his physiological needs, food and water, he desperately seeks psychological anchors. We hoard things that tether us to our previous civilized identity.
To remember who we were.
For Hoke, the Bing Crosby records, the specific brand of whiskey, the ability to smoke a Camel cigarette in a soft chair, these are tangible tethers to a world that possessed logic and comfort. Eating canned peas while sitting in a luxury suite is a way to actively assert his humanity against the encroaching feral world of cannibal dogs and burning rats we just saw in the tunnels. It is an act of psychological defiance.
But even inside this fortified sanctuary, the ghosts of the old world still cause incredible friction. The group finally gets to clean up. They wash off the tunnel grime, they put on some high-fashion pre-war clothes, they scavenge from the hotel closets, and suddenly a bitter clash of classes erupts right there in the suite.
Oh, the argument between Cissie and Muriel.
Muriel looks around the Savoy and gets deeply nostalgic. She talks about eating Lord Woolton pie, which was a famous wartime rationing dish made of vegetables, in the Savoy's elegant river room with her father, and drinking expensive champagne to honor her dead mother. And Cissie, who has been holding it together this entire time, just snaps at her.
Cissie's reaction is grounded in deep, historical working-class resentment, and the apocalypse has removed all the polite societal filters that would usually suppress it.
She uses this biting, venomous sarcasm. She points out to Muriel that she grew up in a grimy pub in Islington that got completely blown apart by a V-1 rocket. She states bluntly that she could never have afforded to step foot inside the Savoy before the world ended, even if she wanted to.
Yeah, she lays it all out.
She openly mocks the absurd idea that the upper class suffered through the war's rationing by eating gourmet vegetable pies prepared by master chefs while the poor were getting bombed in the slums. The world has literally ended. Almost everyone on the planet is dead. But the rigid British class divides from 1939 are still sitting right there in the room with them, arguing over a bottle of whiskey.
It is a brilliant sociological observation by the author. It highlights how incredibly deep social conditioning runs in the human psyche. The apocalypse did not erase their backgrounds. It merely placed them in a vacuum where those backgrounds are the only things they have left to define themselves.
That's so true.
Muriel clings to the memory of the Savoy because it represents the safety, status, and familial love of her past. Cissie fiercely resents it because the hotel represents the systemic inequality she faced her entire life. The shared trauma of the tunnels hasn't united them into a single mindset. It has just forced incompatible worldviews into extreme proximity.
But with their immediate physical needs finally met, they are clean, they have calories in their systems, and the whiskey and wine are flowing heavily, the defensive walls finally begin to crack. The group sits together and begins to share the harrowing, personal stories of how they actually survived the initial outbreak 3 years ago.
This is where the macro tragedy of the global apocalypse becomes deeply, painfully personal. We learn the truth about the medical sanatorium in Dorset, where Cissie and Muriel were held.
Right. They weren't just sheltering there, they were essentially human guinea pigs.
Yeah.
The few immune doctors left alive locked them away in this facility, constantly drawing their AB-negative blood, running endless tests, trying desperately to synthesize an antidote while the world outside violently died.
Horrible.
And then, one day, the testing just stopped. The doctors realized it was entirely hopeless, the disease had won, and they simply abandoned the facility to go die on their own terms. They left the girls locked inside to fend for themselves.
It is a terrifying realization of institutional abandonment. The authorities, the people inherently trusted to fix the world, simply gave up and walked away.
And Potter, the warden, who has spent years listening to the silence, shares the grim lore of the city. He tells them what actually happened to the great symbols of British resilience. He reveals that the royal family did not survive.
Right.
They were evacuated to Windsor and put on a plane to escape the island. But the pilots succumbed to the blood death during takeoff. The plane crashed, killing everyone on board. The monarchy ended in a fiery wreck on a runway.
And he shares the most devastating, demoralizing rumor of all, the fate of Winston Churchill.
Potter lowers his voice and says the persistent rumor among the final survivors was that Churchill, the man who rallied the entire nation through the darkest days of the Blitz, who promised blood, toil, tears, and sweat, who embodied the bulldog spirit of Britain, shot himself. He committed suicide.
It's just staggering.
To lead a nation through its absolute darkest hour, to endure years of bombings, to finally secure the hard-fought victory against Nazi Germany, and then have the prize turned to literal ash in your hands overnight because of a spiteful biological weapon.
It is a staggering Greek tragedy. But I want to ask you, what does that rumor tell us about the limits of human resilience? If the ultimate historical symbol of stubborn defiance simply breaks, what hope does anyone else have?
It masterfully synthesizes the central, overarching theme of the narrative, the concept of finite grief. Earlier in the text, Hoke makes a profound observation. He notes that the human soul can only absorb so much tragedy before permanent numbness sets in.
Finite grief, I like that.
Churchill's rumored fate suggests that for some individuals, the psychological gap between the monumental effort required to save the world and the sudden, total destruction of it is simply unbridgeable. Resilience inherently requires a foundation of hope, a belief in a tomorrow. When Hitler's final weapon systematically erased the future, it erased the utility of resilience. Why endure if there is nothing left to rebuild? Everyone in that room has hit that exact limit, but their minds have fractured in completely different directions. Potter hit his limit and retreated into the delusion of his warden duties. Hoke hit his limit and isolated himself with alcohol, heavy weapons, and hypervigilance. Stern's story is equally tragic.
We learned that when Stern escaped the POW camp in Wales right as the plague hit, he managed to survive alone by scavenging. But when he finally encountered other immune British villagers, they nearly lynched him.
Oh, wow.
They heard his German accent and, in their grief and terror, blamed him entirely for the quote-unquote German plague. He was violently persecuted by the very few people left alive on Earth. Now, his only goal is to find a boat, cross the channel, and go home to Germany, even though he logically knows Germany is likely just as dead as London.
He focuses on a probably futile geographical goal just to keep his legs moving. The girls rely entirely on their bond with each other. Everyone has forged a shield out of their trauma. But when the talking finally stops, the alcohol wears off, and the lights go out in the Savoy, those shields begin to crack.
Which brings us to the profound outro of our source narrative. The quiet, insidious horror of the night.
Hoke tries to sleep in the massive, luxurious bed of the suite, but his subconscious betrays him. He is hit by a severe, vivid PTSD nightmare. He's back in the cockpit of his Hurricane fighter plane in 1941, caught in a terrifying, chaotic dogfight against German Fubli 190s.
Reliving the war.
In the dream, he pushes the plane into a 600-mile-far compressibility dive. The physics of the dives cause the controls to completely lock up. He is plummeting toward the earth, totally out of control, screaming as the ground rushes up to meet him. It is such a clear manifestation of his waking life, his total terrifying lack of control over his current world.
The adrenaline spikes and he wakes up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding in the silent, dark room.
And as he's sitting there in the dark, trying to catch his breath, there's a soft, hesitant knock at his bedroom door. The door slowly opens and the moonlight streams into the room. It's Muriel.
And she's weeping, right?
She is weeping. The overwhelming trauma of the day, the fire on the stairs, the screaming rats, the feral dogs in the tunnel, the Blackshirts, combined with the resurfacing of all her painful memories about her parents and her old life during their conversation, have completely broken her composure. She is seeking basic human comfort. She just wants to be held by another living person in a world that's been entirely emptied of warmth.
It is the ultimate quiet test of Hoke's entire coping mechanism. It is the moment where survival and humanity violently collide.
And what does he do? He looks at her standing there crying in the moonlight, and he steps away. He physically and emotionally withdraws. His numbness, his absolute rejection of feelings, acts as his final defense mechanism.
Because if he cares.
He knows with absolute certainty that if he lets her in, if he allows himself to care about her, the brutal world outside that window can take her away from him tomorrow. Just like it took his wife, his squadron mates, his entire previous life. The emotional pain of connection, the vulnerability of love, is vastly more terrifying to him than the Blackshirts or the cannibal dogs.
Because surviving the physical threats is only half the battle of the apocalypse. The internal landscape, the battle against your own need for connection, is just as dangerous, if not more so.
So I leave you with this thought to mull over. Imagine yourself in that moonlit room, the ruins of London stretching out in absolute silence around you. In a world where almost everyone is dead, the real terror isn't the monsters waiting outside the door. It's lowering your own defenses enough to care about someone else, knowing you are absolutely powerless to protect them from the chaos. If you were Hoke, standing in the cold moonlight of a dead city, would you embrace that human connection and risk being utterly broken again? Or would you lock the door to protect your own heart, even if it meant becoming a ghost yourself?
A truly haunting question to consider.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the harrowing, beautifully realized world of the 48 source material. Keep exploring, and we will see you next time.